Hi guys, Ronnie here and welcome to the workshop. Last time around I've shown you a bike that I'm not really riding at the moment, but today I want to show you the bike that I'm actually using for my winter training. Why do I need a winter training bike? Well, I prefer to do lots of volume over the winter, so traditional style of training periodization. I started doing this 3 years ago basically. When I built my first winter road bike. It wasn't that great, to be honest, but it did the job. And the main point is that it makes your life a lot less miserable by, well, taking off some of the harshest winter conditions, and not requiring as much maintenance. Last winter was so mild that I didn't even need a bike like this. This winter is really quite harsh. We had a lot of snow, a lot of ice and sub-zero temperatures. So for that I stuck to the indoor bike, but still I tend to use this quite a lot, and hopefully for the next few weeks it's going to be a bit warmer. So I'm going to be on this one. So let's dive into the details. As you can see, this is my Factor Ostro gravel bike, repurposed as a winter road bike. Why did I do this? Now, when I first got a gravel bike, my idea was that I'm going to ride it through the winter because it's just more fun, perhaps safer to ride off-road. And a lot of people think the same way based on, well, reviews on the internet, etc. But to be honest, it doesn't really work like that, certainly not where I live, because for most of the winter it's just too wet to ride off-road, and the roads that I used to ride during the season on my gravel bike are just not rideable, or are very muddy and would require a lot of maintenance, and it's just not very practical to ride them, or very fun, to be honest. So I'm sticking to the road until things dry up a little bit. And because of some of the features, a gravel bike is the ideal winter road bike, and that's mainly because of the tire clearance. I'm sure you have already guessed that it's also about the mud guards. So it's much easier to fit these when you have a lot of clearance, even with quite wide tires that I'm using. So usually I get a huge amount of questions regarding these. These are the CRUD Road Racer Mark IIIs. These are not full-on solid mud guards like you would find on, I don't know, a touring bike. These essentially are designed to fit any road bike with sufficient clearance, and they're held on by these 3M dual-tack tapes, so you can remove them fairly easily. Although it's not very practical to do because they're not very stiff, so they require a bit of adjustment each time you remove them, and it's not a very quick thing to do, but if you want to do it, you can. I prefer to leave them on. Now, I've had these for the last 3 years. Last year I haven't been using them, but they have quite a lot of miles in them. And because of the, well, plastic construction, they're not very stiff, so they bounce around a bit. As a result of that, the front part has broken off, which is a bit unfortunate, but that's perhaps the least important part of the whole thing. The important thing is that they are full length, basically, so the rear completely shields you and your bum from the water spray of the road. And the front part, while it's not perfect, it does shield you from 90% of the road spray. There's some water that is escaping in this area, but unless you were to install a larger flap there, that would be really unaerodynamic. I think this is the best we can do on a bike like this that has no provisions for mounting proper mud guards. This is a race bike essentially, so it doesn't have those. But I'm really happy with them. Maybe I'll try to botch the front part because I still have it, but I haven't been bothered. The mud guards alone, I think, are the most important aspect in a way that Usually it's wet during the winter and they keep the spray off you, so you can be much more comfortable and much less wet and much less cold. Another feature that I was appreciating with my earlier winter bike is that it was quite slow, and the slower you go, the less wind chill you get. Now, that's not really true for this bike, fortunately or unfortunately. It's an aeroframe, really efficient, and the result is that I achieve almost the same speeds as on a proper road bike, even though all these gubbins are attached to it. So yeah, it's fast, but there's more wind chill. I'm not too bothered about that, but I just thought it's worth mentioning. It helps in the winter, in particular if you can ride slower for the same effort, however weird that might sound. Another thing you need in gloomy conditions are, of course, lights. Now, you might think that this huge light on there is a bit overkill, and to be honest, it is. But my father is in the habit of buying unnecessary stuff, so I just found this laying around in his garage, and I just, well, kidnapped it, to be honest. And it works great. It's the Nog Power Mountain, so it's essentially a huge power bank strapped to a light. It's kind of a round section and there's no real mount for it, so I use this specialized adapter that's designed for this exact purpose. It's quite easy because it's round. And one thing that I really appreciate about it is that it has no buttons. You operate it by twisting the lens. It's quite smart because it's very easy to do even in thick gloves, so you can switch between the modes, which you will need to, because at 2000 lumens you're going to be blinding everybody on the road, which is not always helpful. But this is an off-road bike essentially, and I have been riding this with gravel tires off-road at night with this light on, and 2000 lumens are enough to have you riding safely even off-road, or on the road, even in high-speed descents. It's fine. For everything else, I use the standard 1000 or 500 lumen settings, and it's perfectly fine. So that's another addition to my bike for the winter. As you can see, I've also added some reflective tapes here. I got these earlier as part of a test product batch, and they work. They increase the visibility, they're not too obtrusive, and they don't add any real weight or aerodynamic penalty, so that's fine. I also have them on fork blades, so I'm visible from the side. Also, the stickers on these head wheels that I have are also made from reflective material, so I'm really visible. And the wheels themselves are set up a bit differently than my race wheel set. So instead of the lightweight TT grease from Ceramic Speed, I have the long life grease and really fully packed, so they don't need to be serviced that often in grimy conditions. Also, the tires here are obviously not the time trial version, but the standard one. I also have a set of all seasons set up or set aside for this build, but these haven't worn out yet, so I'm going to wait. I also use a bit more sealant in there just in case. And if you go further behind the bike or behind the bar, you can also notice this Topic rubberized Bento box. Now, this is not mounted because I'm dabbling in triathlon. It has one very prosaic reason on there. In thick winter gloves, I find it really hard to access my back pockets on my jackets. So I prefer to stash my solid nutrition, which you will need a lot of in winter because you don't drink that much. So you need the carbs rolling in. Anyway, I have them in there, much easier to reach, much easier to just stuff the used wrapper on there. So that's entirely for practicality, but I also would assume that it's slightly more aerodynamic because it fills the low pressure area behind the stem. But that's just a guess. We might try to test it when the weather gets, well, warm enough for testing. As for the rest of the cockpit, everything else is exactly the same. Bolt to computer there, Ultegra levers, and the rest of the group cell, of course. So that's all standard. As the bottle cages, etc., all of the drivetrain, that's unchanged, except that every single bearing is filled with a high amount of long life grease, like I said with the wheels. So that's just a preventive measure to keep everything running smoothly. Still use molten speed wax on the chain, topped off with silica. So that's all pretty standard stuff. It's just the frequency of the rewaxing is a bit higher. One more thing I did change as far as the contact points go are the pedals. Now for gravel racing and training during the season, I'm using the Speedplay Pave titanium pedals, but those are firstly very narrow Q factor, and secondly have a very open bearing design, so not really suited for gritty conditions. So I just swapped them over with the zero pedals from my kicker bike. And these firstly have longer spindles, so that leaves more room at the crank for bulky overshoes, which you need on a winter bike. And secondly, these are also packed full of grease, very sturdy, very resistant sealing on there, so that's for added durability too. As for the rear light, that's another important factor on a bike like this, pun not intended. This is a specialized sticks. It's basically, again, a leftover that someone left. Here I also have one that I bought myself. There are two versions. Basically, this is a thicker one with a larger battery, and also I think this one is more powerful, but it has some very nice flashing modes. It lasts a whole lot of hours even in freezing conditions, so I really like it. It's full rubberized construction, and it's charged via a USB port that I'm struggling to access with one hand. But the point is, it can't really get soaked, completely waterproof, and yeah, very bright, good runtime, so I just use it. Specialized also have a mount for it for their saddles, but this is a fabric saddle, so I just use a rubber strap here. Since the back of the seat post is flat, it sits on there quite nicely, so that's all well and good. One more thing I have changed. Normally on these wheels, on my road wheels, I have the race cassettes, but I just swapped over the Ultegra cassette from my gravel wheel set to not wear out the fancy race one. The rest is basically unchanged. Although maybe I could get away with one by gearing, well, most likely during the winter, because I prefer to ride flatter roads, firstly because it's safer with slippery conditions, and yeah, you don't really want to overheat up the climbs in the winter. So yeah, that could be changed, but as for the rest of it, it's really turning out to be the perfect winter bike. So I'm really happy with how it goes. But on some days, unfortunately, it's still too cold or, well, miserable to ride this. So for those days, I have my kicker bike now with some modifications. So if you want to see more about that, then stay tuned for the next video. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.